The wine hit Mara Williams like winter cold, humiliating and impossible to ignore. 1 second she was doing her job, invisible like she'd been trained to be, and the next she stood drenched in red while the richest people in the room laughed as if her dignity was entertainment. Brandon Ashford's grin was the kind that came from a life where consequences always landed on someone else. His parents joined in, polished and proud, treating her pain like a private joke. Mara felt the sting behind her eyes and swallowed it down because tears had never saved her. She had grown up learning that if you were poor, if you were a girl with no family name to protect you, you survived by becoming quiet. But just as Brandon leaned in to add one more insult, a voice cut through the ballroom deep, calm, and sharp enough to silence even the arrogant. A man stepped from the shadows near the windows as if darkness had been waiting to release him. His suit was flawless, his presence heavier than money, and his eyes so dark they looked endless, locked onto Mara with a focus that made her skin prickle, like her body recognized him before her mind could. Richard Ashford's smile changed instantly when he saw the stranger. "Mr. Kane," he said, too eager, too nervous. The man didn't react to the greeting the way other investors did. He didn't soak in attention, he commanded it without trying. He looked at Brandon as if he could see through his wealth and into something small and ugly underneath. "Is that what you call fun?" Mr. Kane asked, tasting the word like something rotten. Brandon tried to laugh it off, but the laugh died when Mr. Kane took a single step closer. The air seemed to chill. The chandeliers glittered, but Mara could have sworn the light dimmed for a heartbeat. As if the room itself responded to him, Mr. Kane turned back to her, and his voice softened in a way that felt strange, gentle, but not weak. "Miss Williams," he said, reading her name tag like it mattered. "Are you hurt?" The question struck Mara harder than the wine because nobody ever asked her that. She forced a small smile. "Just my pride," she managed, though her hands shook. Then Mr. Kane did something that rewired the entire room's power. He removed his expensive jacket and offered it to her like a shield, not to look noble, not to impress anyone, like it was the most natural thing in the world that she deserved warmth and protection. Mara hesitated because accepting kindness had always come with a price, but his gaze was steady, patient, certain. "Take it," he said quietly. The fabric was warm in a way that didn't make sense, like it carried heat that wasn't human. She wrapped it around her shoulders, and for the first time that night, she didn't feel exposed. She felt seen. Mr. Kane turned to the Ashfords again, his expression becoming stone. "We have a meeting tomorrow about the Nightfall investment," he said. Richard's relief flared until Mr. Kane added, "Pending. Because I will reconsider the character of my business associates." Catherine's face tightened. Brandon went pale. The billionaire deal they'd been bragging about suddenly hung by a thread, and the thread was this man's judgment. "Miss Williams will receive a clean uniform and a sincere apology," Mr. Kane continued, and the word sincere sounded like a command. Then he looked at Brandon one last time. "Learn how to treat people with dignity." All people. Mara rushed toward the service corridor, heart racing, jacket clutched tight. She didn't understand why a man this powerful cared about a waitress. She didn't understand why her skin still tingled where his eyes had been. But as she pushed through the door, she felt it again being watched. She glanced back, and through the narrow gap she saw Mr. Kane standing perfectly still in the shadows, staring after her like he had been searching for her for centuries. His lips moved in a language that should not exist anymore, and even though she couldn't hear the words, her blood seemed to understand. Beneath her skin, something dormant pulsed once like a heartbeat waking up. Mara stumbled into the service corridor with her heart hammering and Draven Kane's jacket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. The wine-soaked uniform clung to her skin, cold and humiliating, but the warmth of the jacket was unsettling in a different way, too steady, too protective, like it carried a promise. She hurried toward the employee-changing area, keeping her head down, trying to become invisible again, because invisibility had always been her safest talent. Yet she could still feel the ballroom behind her, the stares, the laughter, the moment she stopped being background and became a target. The second she pushed open the staff room door, her supervisor's expression sharpened into anger, not concern. "What did you do?" The woman hissed, as if the humiliation had been Mara's fault. Before Mara could answer, two security guards appeared, one holding a clipboard with papers already prepared. "Standard procedure," the guard said, voice flat. "Sign this, non-disclosure. You will not discuss what happened tonight." The words landed like a trap snapping shut. Mara stared at the page, reading the parts where the Ashfords' lawyers had turned her pain into a misunderstanding, where the document demanded silence in exchange for a small payout that wouldn't even cover her rent. Her throat tightened. She could almost hear her younger self, small, frightened, trained by foster homes to cooperate so she wouldn't be punished. Then something strange happened. The moment her fingers touched the pen, a sharp prickle raced up her left wrist. Like static electricity, then cold heat spreading under her skin. Mara flinched, dropping the pen. The fluorescent light above them flickered. One of the guards frowned at the ceiling. Mara looked down at her arm and froze. Faint silver lines, thin as threads of moonlight, were visible just beneath her skin, curling into patterns that did not look like any tattoo she had ever seen. The symbols pulsed once like they were breathing. Mara blinked hard, and the marks faded, almost shy. But the sensation remained, a warning buzz that made her blood feel awake. "I'm not signing," Mara said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Her supervisor's eyes widened as if refusing was a crime. "Don't be stupid," she snapped. "That family can ruin you." The guard leaned closer. "Miss, we're trying to help you." "You don't want problems." Mara's hands trembled, but she clutched the jacket tighter, and something about it gave her spine strength. She had been poor her whole life. She had been stepped on, ignored, blamed. Tonight, for the first time, someone powerful had looked at her like she mattered. And now these people wanted to erase that moment, bury it, teach her the old lesson again. Stay quiet, stay small, accept what you're given. Mara swallowed hard. "Tell them I want a clean uniform," she said, and an apology. "If they can laugh in public, they can apologize in public." The supervisor scoffed. One guard glanced at the other, uncertainty flickering across his face as if even he knew this was wrong. Mara turned away before her courage could collapse. She changed into a spare blouse offered by another worker who avoided her eyes, not out of cruelty but fear of being associated with her. When she stepped into the hallway again, the building felt different, too quiet, too hollow, as if the night had shifted around her. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Don't go home the usual way." "Don't sign anything, keep the jacket on." Mara's stomach dropped. Another message followed immediately. "You're being watched. We can't stop them if you make it easy. Call the number in your pocket." Mara's fingers went cold. The black business card Draven had slipped into her hand earlier suddenly felt heavier, like it had been waiting for this moment. She didn't understand how anyone could know about it unless Draven had people, unless this wasn't just about a cruel rich boy and a brave stranger. Her wrist tingled again, and this time the silver marks reappeared for a heartbeat, brighter, as if reacting to the warning. She lifted her gaze down the corridor and saw, through the narrow window at the end of the hall, a figure across the street standing too still in the shadows. Not walking, not smoking, just watching her building like it had an appointment. Mara's breath caught. She didn't wait to see if the figure moved. She pulled the jacket tighter, took out the card, and called the number because whatever was happening, Draven Kane was the only person who had treated her like a human being, and the only person who seemed to know why her blood was suddenly speaking in silver. Draven Kane arrived at Mara's apartment like the night itself had opened a door for him. The hallway light flickered as he stepped inside the narrow space. His presence too large for the peeling paint and low ceiling, yet strangely calming. Mara stood frozen near her mattress, his jacket still wrapped around her shoulders, her phone clenched in her hand. The moment his eyes found her wrist, glowing faintly silver beneath her skin, something unreadable crossed his face, relief mixed with fear. "You're awake," he said quietly, as if that mattered more than anything else. Mara swallowed hard. "I tried to sleep," she admitted. "But every time I close my eyes I see things. Places I've never been. People bowing to someone who looks like me." Draven moved closer, careful, controlled, like approaching something fragile and dangerous at the same time. "Those aren't dreams," he said. "They're memories, not yours." "But carried in your blood." He asked her permission before touching her wrist, and that alone unsettled her. His fingers were cool against her warm skin as he traced the faint symbols, which brightened under his touch like they recognized him. "The marks are spreading faster than they should," he murmured. "Something accelerated your awakening." Mara's stomach twisted. "The wine," she said suddenly. "That's what you meant earlier," Draven nodded once. "It wasn't just cruelty. The wine contained traces of substances that react with dormant supernatural blood. Someone wanted to see if you would respond." The words made the room feel colder. "Respond how?" Mara asked. Draven met her eyes. "By revealing yourself," he told her the truth, then not all of it, but enough to shatter the life she thought she had. 500 years ago, humans and vampires had nearly destroyed each other in a war fueled by fear and power. Peace came not from victory, but from sacrifice. A human woman named Ara Nightfall bound her bloodline to the vampire crown, creating a living treaty descendants who could walk between worlds, enforce balance, and prevent either side from wiping the other out. "They were called Peace Bloods," Draven said. "Neither fully human nor fully vampire?" Mara's chest tightened. "And they all died," she whispered, remembering the burning throne room from her visions. Draven's jaw tightened. "That's what we believed." The Nightfall line was slaughtered in one coordinated purge. He looked at her steadily. "Until tonight," Mara staggered back, sitting hard on the edge of her mattress. "I'm just a waitress," she said, almost pleading. "I get sick. I bleed. I struggle to pay rent." Draven crouched in front of her so they were eye level, an act of humility that made her breath catch. "You are human," he said softly, "and more. Your mother used ancient magic to hide what you are, to keep you safe. But hiding is never permanent." Outside, a faint sound echoed footsteps, then silence. Draven's eyes flicked to the window. "You're not the only one who felt your awakening," he added. "Others will come. Some to control you. Some to kill you?" Mara's fear spiked, but beneath it something else stirred anger. "All my life, people like Brandon Ashford thought they could do whatever they wanted to me," she said. "Because I was small. Because I was poor." The silver marks pulsed, brighter now. Draven watched them with a mixture of awe and respect. "That ends now," he said. "Not because of me, but because of who you are becoming." He stood, every inch the king he had been hiding, and placed a hand over his heart in a gesture that felt ancient. "By vampire law, by blood oath, your safety is now under my protection." Mara looked at him. At the powerful, dangerous being who had stepped into her life because of one cruel moment at a gala. Her old world was gone. In its place stood something terrifying and strange, and for the first time, she didn't feel alone facing it. Morning arrived heavy and gray, as if the city itself sensed that something powerful had shifted overnight. Mara barely slept, sitting on her mattress with her back against the wall while Draven stood watch near the window, silent and unmoving for hours. Every now and then the silver marks on her wrist pulsed softly, reacting to sounds in the distance or emotions she couldn't yet name. When dawn finally broke, Draven's phone vibrated with messages from his people, and the calm in his face hardened into something colder, more royal. "The Ashfords are panicking," he said simply. "They know the deal is in danger." Mara wrapped her arms around herself. Part of her wanted to disappear, to wake up back in the version of life where her biggest worry was rent, not ancient bloodlines and hidden enemies. But another, part small, quiet, and newly brave, listened closely. Draven took her to a secure townhouse hidden behind old stone walls, a place that felt untouched by time. Inside, the air was cool and still, candles burning, though the sun was up. He explained that the Nightfall investment was never just business. It was leverage. The Ashford's empire depended on his money, his influence, and the protection his name quietly provided in circles far darker than corporate boardrooms. In a private meeting that afternoon, he sat across from Richard and Catherine Ashford. His expression unreadable as they spoke too quickly, offered excuses, and pretended last night had been a misunderstanding. Draven listened until they ran out of words. Then he asked one question. "Why did your son choose her?" The silence that followed was thick. Brandon shifted, sweat beading on his forehead. He insisted it was a joke, random cruelty fueled by alcohol. Draven's eyes narrowed. "Nothing is random," he said, "especially when old blood is involved." He canceled the deal in that moment, not with anger, but with certainty. $1 billion withdrawn, contracts dissolved, partnerships ended with a single command. The Ashfords' power cracked like glass. News traveled fast, investors fled, boards panicked. And for the first time in their lives, consequences arrived without asking permission. Mara watched from a screen in the next room, her hands shaking as she realized that the laughter which had crushed her the night before had cost them everything. It wasn't revenge that filled her chest. It was justice, quiet, final, that evening. As the city buzzed with rumors of the Ashfords' fall, Draven stood beside Mara on the townhouse balcony. She told him she felt guilty. That part of her wondered if this was too much. Draven turned to her, his voice steady. "They are not suffering because of you," he said. "They are suffering because of who they chose to be." She nodded slowly, feeling the truth settle. The marks on her wrist glowed brighter, then softened, responding not to anger, but to balance being restored. Later, when fear crept back in, Draven showed her how to ground herself, how to breathe when memories that weren't hers tried to rise, how to focus on the present when centuries pressed in on her mind. Their hands brushed once, accidentally, and the air between them shifted, charged and intimate. He pulled back immediately, respect in his restraint, and that restraint made her trust him more than any promise could. She realized then that his protection wasn't possessive. It was patient, earned. As night fell, Draven told her the truth he had been holding back. "The world will feel you now," he said. "Your awakening has sent a signal. There are vampires who fear what you represent, and others who will kneel." Mara looked out at the city lights, her reflection in the glass, no longer looking small or broken. "Then I'll learn," she said quietly, "because I'm tired of being afraid." Draven watched her with something close to pride, and something deeper he did not yet name. The night after the Ashfords' fall was restless, not loud but tense like the pause before a storm. Mara felt it in her bones as she walked through the townhouse halls, the silver marks on her wrist glowing faintly whenever her emotions rose too high. Draven had assigned guards she could not see, but could somehow sense, quiet presences layered into the shadows, watching without suffocating. "Your blood is learning," he told her when she asked why the air felt alive. "It remembers what to do." The idea frightened her, yet it also gave her a strange sense of grounding, like discovering muscles she'd never known she had. That night, Draven began teaching her simple things: how to calm the surge in her veins, how to focus when the memories tried to push forward, how to tell the difference between fear and warning. He never raised his voice, never rushed her. Every lesson felt less like training and more like trust being built carefully, one moment at a time. As the city slept, troubling news arrived. One of Draven's scouts reported movement and ancient factions stirring. Vampires who believed the Nightfall bloodline should never exist again. They had ruled through fear once, and peace had cost them power. Mara listened silently as Draven explained this, her jaw tightening. "They'll come for me," she said. Draven met her gaze without hesitation. "They'll have to come through me first." It wasn't a boast, it was a fact. And yet, instead of feeling sheltered, Mara felt something else spark defiance. "I won't hide forever," she said quietly. The silver marks pulsed, responding to her resolve. Draven nodded, approval softening his expression. "Good," he said. "And because hiding was never your destiny." Later that night, another truth surfaced. Brandon Ashford had been questioned by authorities and private investigators alike, and under pressure, his arrogance cracked. He admitted that the wine incident had been encouraged by someone outside his family, an anonymous suggestion, a dare wrapped in entitlement. He hadn't known why he'd been told to target that specific waitress, only that it made him feel powerful. Mara absorbed the information with a heavy heart. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it revealed something darker beneath it. She had been marked long before the gala. Draven's jaw tightened as he listened. "They were testing for you," he said. "And now they know you're real." The weight of it pressed down on her chest, but she didn't crumble. She straightened. "Then let them know I'm not alone." That was the moment something shifted between them. On the balcony, beneath a moon that felt closer than it should, Mara thanked him not for saving her, but for believing in her. Draven looked away briefly, as if steadying himself. "I have lived a very long time," he said. And I have learned that power without compassion becomes cruelty. He turned back to her. You remind me why the pact mattered. Their hands met again, this time intentionally. The contact was brief, respectful, but the air between them thrummed with connection, quiet, deep, and unspoken. He released her hand first, not because he didn't want more, but because he understood patience. As dawn approached, Mara stood taller than she ever had before. The poor waitress who had been laughed at was still part of her, but she was no longer the whole story. Somewhere in the distance, enemies gathered. Somewhere closer, allies prepared. And at her side stood a vampire king who did not cage her strength, but guarded it until she was ready to wield it herself. The final confrontation did not come with fire or screaming armies, but with silence heavy, deliberate, and full of meaning. At dawn, the ancient faction that had hunted the Nightfall bloodline made their move, slipping into the city with the confidence of predators who believed history was on their side. They expected fear. They expected a hidden girl, confused and unprepared. Instead, they found Mara standing beside Draven Kane in the open hall of the old townhouse, her posture calm, her eyes steady, the silver marks on her skin glowing with quiet authority. For the first time, she did not shrink under the weight of power around her. She met it. Draven addressed them first, his voice carrying centuries of command. He named their crimes, their greed, their fear of balance. When they mocked the idea of a former waitress standing as heir to an ancient pact, Mara spoke, and the room listened. She did not shout, she did not threaten. She spoke of dignity, of how cruelty always reveals weakness, and how power without respect destroys itself. As she spoke, the marks on her wrist brightened, responding not to anger, but to truth. The ancient vampires felt it then, the treaty awakening, the balance reasserting itself. This was not a queen who ruled by force. This was a bridge, exactly as the pact had intended. The faction withdrew, not defeated by violence, but bound by something stronger, law older than their ambition. When the hall emptied, Mara's legs finally trembled. Draven stepped forward, steadying her without crowding her space. You chose peace, he said softly. Even when you had every reason to choose revenge, Mara exhaled, emotion flooding her chest. I know what it feels like to be powerless, she replied. I won't become what hurt me. Draven bowed his head not as a ruler to a subject, but as an equal recognizing something greater than himself. In that moment, their bond settled into something unbreakable, built on respect before romance, trust before desire. News of the Ashfords' collapse and the mysterious investor who walked away from a billion-dollar deal spread across the city. Brandon faced public accountability. His parents lost their influence. And quietly, without cameras or applause, policies changed. Workers were protected. Contracts rewritten. It wasn't magic, it was consequence. Mara returned once to the restaurant, not as a server, but to collect her final paycheck. The staff looked at her differently now, not because she was feared, but because she stood taller. She smiled kindly, reminding herself that worth was never given by others, it had always been hers. On the balcony that evening, Draven stood beside her as equals, watching the city breathe. The world will test you, he said. Again and again, Mara nodded. Then I'll keep choosing who I am, she answered. Their hands intertwined naturally without urgency. The romance between them was no fairy tale rush. It was slow, deliberate, and earned, two beings from different worlds choosing the same path. Mara Williams had begun the story as a girl humiliated for being poor and unseen. She ended it as a woman who proved that kindness is not weakness, that respect is the truest power, and that judging someone by their status is the most dangerous mistake of all.